Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to Not Just Tea, the Untold History and Future of Tea. Just a few housekeeping tips before we get started. To your left, there's chat. Feel free to engage one another as you like. We will have a Q&A session towards the end. In your interface, if you look at towards the top, you'll see a question mark. Use that to submit any questions for our panelists. And then please, if you are tweeting, posting, sharing on social media, please use the hashtag #NotJustTea or either #NotJustTeaPanel. Both of those are A-OK. My name is Chris Vaughn. I will be facilitating this afternoon's discussion. I am an author, consultant, and the creator of In Her Company, a growing platform for women to discuss how they create, build, and live. So this is not only a story about what's happening in a small city in Southwest China, but a larger story of what we value, where we obtain our information, and the cultures and ancient traditions at risk. Our panelists represent unique perspectives and expertise surrounding tea. It is our hope that this conversation adds depth, forming a broader story than you've heard, and that our social interaction increases awareness. We are assuming that you have enjoyed the video and the panelist introductions that accompany your registration. With that, each panelist will now give their 1-minute introduction, and we will enter the conversation from that point. Ray, why don't you start us off?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to join us to this much needed conversation. I will start by telling you my name is in Chinese. My Chinese name is Louie, and here I call myself Ray, and people call me Ray. And I come from a province called Guizhou in southwest of China, where tea originated from, in part of the area. And where I grew up, tea has been wild, has been indigenous, has been made through traditional methods. And I'm here to share with you my stories today. And thank you very much for tuning in.
Linda?
Hello, my name is Linda Louie. I'm the owner of Vaughn Tea Company. It is an online tea company specializing in pu'er tea. And I studied tea under a tea master in Hong Kong who took me to my first tea field trip to Yunnan, China. And since I have been traveled to various major tea regions in the world to study tea cultivation practices and tradition and culture. And I shared what I learned by giving tea lectures and demonstrations at various venues like tea conventions, Huntington Library and Gardens, public libraries, and some private venues. I grew up in Hong Kong, and tea has been around me all my life, but I really didn't understand tea until I studied it. So, and it has been my never-ending pursuit.
Thank you. Lisa?
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Chris, for including me on this conversation. I am a writer. I write novels. I write mostly historical novels, and my novel, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, has as its historic backdrop tea. And I met Linda very early in my research, and I was asking her advice about where I should go in China to do research, and I was wanting to go for people confusion, and she said, "Why don't you just come with me?" And so off we went, and so much of what I've learned about tea has been through Linda and her tea master, And again, I'm just really thrilled to be here today.
Okay, and Elise?
Hi, my name is Elise Peterson, and I am the founder of TEAT. It's an online farmers market for independent tea growers around the world. I'm, honored to be on this panel. First and foremost, because I have, zero, heritage to China or to really any tea growing country or tea drinking culture. In fact, I started my studies in tea not as a connoisseur, not even someone experienced tea. I started out as a food scientist, looking at the technical aspects of, more mass scale processing of tea. But I'm also an ex-Peace Corps volunteer, so I'm very much interested in preserving cultures, preserving indigenous knowledge that created the sustainability and interconnected development of communities. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Chris, this is Lisa. Can I just say, I think we're getting a lot of messages about the
Yeah, I'm looking
scratching.
at that too. And so I believe all attendees entered as mics muted. If you have not, please help us out and ensure that your mics are in fact muted. But thank you for letting us know. Greatly appreciated. We hope the audio, yes, we hope the audio will definitely improve. So thank you. Thank you. Okay. And yeah, y'all, let's do the same. Let's keep our mics muted as well when we're not speaking, okay? Just to assist this. All right. So thank you for the introductions. And so, Ray, why don't you share your story with us? And then we will begin our conversations afterwards.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to start my story by perhaps I'm going to start with grass people tree. Grass people, I won grass people tree, and I'd like to start by explaining why grass people tree is called grass people tree. So, in Chinese, when you write the word tea, cha, you have to write three components. One is grass at the top, and then tree at the bottom, and people in the middle. So in how I grew up, tea now is the moment when all the elements come together. And it also is an art form that constantly questions the relationship um, between human and nature. So where I come from, tea has been made in tune with nature, foraged from wilderness, and shared and recycled in tune with nature. And I've never heard about, before I came here, I've never heard about tea that had to be brewed at specific temperature, 85, 90, 95. I've never thought that tea would go bitter, even you brew it at 100 degree. Because I grew up when tea was made in tune with nature, foraged, made throughout the course of 5 to 60 days. It doesn't tend to do that. And we actually use boiling water to test whether it's a great tea or not. So I've been living in London for 12 years, and I founded Glass People Tree because I've seen the gap. In the overarching concept of tea, there's a gap, and also in every step of the way in terms of tea growing, tea picking, tea making, tea sharing, tea recycling, every step of the way there's a gap. So my story and my job is here to fill in the gap by sharing my part of the experience, that how I know tea, and also by sharing the collective wisdom of nature that I grew up in, and my ancestors and my masters who how um, taught me how to see tea and how to see life and how to see nature. And the reason for me that is important to be on this panel is to invite all of us to question the way we see tea, because tea has 5,000 years of history, and how we approach tea has probably from 19th century. So what happened to those 4,800 years? Part of my talk here is to bring another dimension of the story through the history of tea, through the tradition of tea, the culture of tea, and the diversity of tea, and to invite all of us to celebrate and to investigate, and also sometimes to question what we've been told, and to really embrace the diversity that life has to offer. So here's me telling my story, and I pass on the mic.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray. And so it sounds like the audio is getting better, y'all. So yay! thank you for tech support. Wow, technology can be a love-hate relationship sometimes, y'all. But thank you for bearing with us. Okay, so on that, let's first start with briefly overviewing what are some common thoughts on what the tea trade is and what it isn't. Linda, why don't you lead us off in this discussion? What are some common thoughts about what the tea trade is, and what is it absolutely not? I,
I didn't do
You
anything.
need to
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. So, most of us know that tea originated from or discovered in China, and actually around the same area as, where Ray was came from, Yunnan, Guizhou, and that tea belt. And then tea was spread, to Japan, Russia, Europe, and the rest of the world. Currently, I think the tea consumed in the United States are mainly hot tea. Hot tea steeped from a tea bag or iced tea. Those are the two teas that are most consumed in the U.S. The quality of tea are primarily commercial, if you consume tea that way. But then I think the trend is definitely changing. Many tea drinkers today are turning to specialty tea, paying more attention to the origin, production methods, and the story behind it. And I think that's a very good thing, because all of those factors affect the tea's value, affect what tea is doing to us in terms of the health benefits, and it's also better for the environment. And I think this is part of the whole conversation that we're having today. Today, I think tea has spread all over the world, and I think the major 4 regions that produce teas are China, Sri Lanka, India, and Kenya. Those are the 4 major players.
Thank you. And Elise, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to add to that. Yeah, Linda, you're absolutely correct. And that divide between the commercial tea and the specialty tea is wide. Very big difference in how the business works and how the trade works. The quantities in which the tea is traded and used around the world is very different as well. And you're correct in that the desire for specialty tea in the developing market for specialty tea is beneficial economically, environmentally, and socially for the people producing tea. But there's still a really long way to go to convert that commercial industry, which is based upon the plantation system of the American slave system. And it really hasn't changed. It's changed hands of ownership, and it's converted from a slavery system to a more indentured labor system. But ultimately, it's still the same. And it's a wide margin between these unskilled indentured laborers to like artisanal tea masters. And I mean, really, that's the work that I've been doing. And it's a lot of seed planting, it's a lot of inspiration. But unfortunately, in the market, what we see on the market side is completely different than what's happening at origin. And on the market side, there's a lot of romantic storytelling, and there's a lot of co-opted terms such as fair trade, direct trade, all these feel-good terms that have been adopted in the industry for a marketing story. But that's what's great about conversations like this, is that it's going to empower the consumer, the tea drinker, to really learn the questions they need to be asking to determine if that story that's being told to them is an authentic story and really benefiting the quality of the tea and the quality of the livelihoods of the people behind the tea.
Yeah, that's so true because I think we all can agree, or most of us can agree right now, that fair trade isn't always fair. There needs to be something better. Maybe it started off with the right intent. It was a good start. But as far as being fair, absolutely not. But we'll get into that more. Lisa, in your book, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Language, I absolutely, absolutely love. You focus on the Aka and several other Chinese ethnic minorities. Can you speak to tea's place and importance in these cultures, please?
Sure. So, Yunnan, for example, has 26 ethnic minorities, and not all of them are involved with tea, but many of them are. And many of the ethnic minorities live in these pretty remote areas high up in the tea mountains. And so they have their own cultures, their own language, and tea has been a very deep and really old, ancient part of their tradition. One of the things I wanted to add to what Elise and Linda said, just for people who might be watching who don't know that much about tea, is to think about how we look at coffee. And, back 20 years ago, maybe we were all drinking Maxwell House or, just stuff that you could make at home. And then Starbucks came along, and then there are a lot
I
of
wasn't.
people who have gone beyond Starbucks, and really want to have a coffee that is much better, that has been grown and processed in an artisanal way. And my husband is one of those people who's just completely devoted to finding some really unique coffee, but making sure that it's been produced properly and using fair trade and all of that. And just one other thing I would like to say about that is, when you drink a cup of tea, whether even if it's just a Lipton tea bag, people have been touching that tea. Every tea leaf that's been picked, somebody has picked it for you. And I think that this makes it really unique, certainly in terms of beverages that we drink. It is the second most popular drink in the world after water. So this is something that is, although we don't drink it a whole lot in this country, around the world, it's just huge. So again, if you think second most popular drink in the world after water, and that every tea leaf has been touched by a human.
Ray is showing us one of her tea leaves from Living Tea, which she'll discuss more about that later as well. But that is actually what I am drinking right now. I'm drinking an aged white tea from the Master's Tea. So, okay. So part of this fairness, though, if we want to stay on that for a moment, and thank you for your response, Lisa. Part of this whole thing is the classifications, because it wasn't until I began taking tea classes. In fact, even I took tea classes for several years off and on, but it wasn't until recently I found out that there was a difference between tea classifications. They differ between the East and the West. So how we view tea has a lot to do with how the language and our perception of the connotation attached to that, what that means. So there are tea classifications that differ between East and West. Ray, why don't you start off with discussing the role of this classification in thought and value formation? In other words, how we value tea, what we think of the people, and the areas that it comes from.
Thank you for this opportunity. I've been itching to talk about this subject. So before we go into classification, I'd like to just to give a little bit of background of what there can be a different way of seeing tea, and the way we see tea, the majority of us seeing tea in this way. But in Yunnan, in Guizhou, in Sichuan, in Hunan, there could be different ways of seeing tea. And so the way of seeing tea dictates the way of making tea and the way of drinking tea or selling tea or sharing tea and how everything goes around. So the overarching philosophy right now, for what I know, the tea that I know, which is called Huo Cha in Chinese, which means the tea that is alive, the living tea. So I'd like to invite everyone to forget a little bit of what we already know about tea. If you don't know anything about tea, perfect. This is for you. So living tea is a very ancient way of understanding tea, i.e. tea is part of nature. So from the very beginning, to see the tea tree, we go into the mountains and trek in the mountains, look for these ancient tea trees. And usually the wind blows and we see, it's there, following the trace of the wind, we found these trees. And these trees are very big, even they're bush type, they're very big. So we carry a ladder to go on top of it to pick. And when we pick the tea leaves, we don't just pick the bud. We see the tea leaves as a human, the bud as the head, the smaller leaves as the arms, the bigger leaves as the legs, the stem as the body, because we believe that tea, like everything else that is living on this planet, has their cells, has their energy. So what we do as making tea is to try to preserve the liveliness within the tea, even long after the tea leaves leave the tree. So the whole process, then we take the tea leaves into the workshop, and then we go into a very long process from 5 days to 60 days of sun withering and this whole process dictates what tea you're going to be made. Rather than we say, okay, we go pick this tea and we're going to make a white tea today, and we have 6 hours on the clock and we're going to make 200 tons of this tea, and today is the deadline. So it's a very different philosophy. So it's the tea master and the crew and everyone involved with the ever-changing mountain climate, the humidity, the temperature, the sun, the wind, our mood, our way of seeing the tea, to constantly to tune in within ourselves with how the tea changes, how the tea evolves with its own living energy. So this is a very, very different overarching philosophy in approaching tea as part of nature. Unfortunately, today, as we evolved into into this modern world, we've gone very far away from knowing or even having awareness of how to listen to tea and how to make a response in tune with nature. So the living tea, to give you an example, earlier I mentioned that the tea wouldn't get bitter no matter how long you brew it, even it's a green tea. And a lot of people are put off by the fact that green tea is bitter. But back to 2,500 years ago, or even more so, tea wasn't like that. And tea hasn't been like that in part of the world. So I think the classification comes from the understanding of the tea. So in Chinese, we say 中国原茶种类, the regional tea classification. There's actually two of them. Sorry, it was just gotten stuck a little bit. I thought I lost you guys. So there are two clarification of how we see tea. Without going too much details on that, I just wanted to say this because to go too much into the concept of classification isn't helpful for us. What's helpful for us is to delve in deeper to see whether or not this tea is made based on part of or all of the natural logic, and to delve in to see the stories of the tea, where they come from, who made them, and who bought them, and why they're here, and what's the soil like. We're the consumer, we can have the power to know this information. So I think for me is not to jump too much into the concept, but really to connect with the tea that you have in your cup today. Get to know it. And I guess that's part of the living tea practice.
Thank you, Ray. And, that's interesting because it's not only with tea, but this is definitely why we are all here today. But it's amazing how words come about and they're set up and definitions are created to keep us distracted from what's important, to keep us distracted from what the main thing actually is. It's real easy for people to get caught up in their own intelligence, if you will, in their own knowledge, just for the sake of, this feels good to me. I know what I'm doing. But then the execution of that, the expression of that, especially when it comes to lives, is totally, totally so far off track. It winds up taking us further away than where we actually want to be. Before moving on in the discussion, did any of the other panelists want to respond to this? Linda, please unmute. Okay, there you go. Just remember to mute when you leave. Just remember to mute it back. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. No, I'm going to say that I totally agree with Ray. And there's just so much in tea that it is interesting when she said that, the tea that she drinks is not bitter. And good quality teas are not supposed to be bitter. And even if it has that bitterness, it's supposed to be transformed into this sort of bittersweet taste that has a really, really good mouthfeel. And that's how tea should be judged. And then I think the story behind the tea, like a lot of times, tea connoisseurs in China or in Asia, they would say, oh, I can taste the orchid in this tea. And that's because of the orchids that is grown by the tea plant. Or, oh, I could taste the camphor because of the camphor tree that is grown in the forest. And, I could go on and on. And the energy of the tea plant, it actually, that's what people like to savor. And I think that is something that I think people in the West or a lot of the tea drinkers are missing. And that is something that we would like to kind of carry on this conversation to make them aware. So much offering from tea.
Because Linda just told me to expand a little bit on this, because I think a lot of us read the labels because consumers we do, and to say, okay, this tea has to, recommended to be brewed this way, and it's meant to make you, you have certain mouthfeel, or you have this and you have that. But I really wanted to question this: who are these people at the back of the studio office writing all these things for all of us? And who are these people to decide how we feel the tea? It's such a subjective uh, receiving from nature. So what I wanted to add is it doesn't matter what the labels tell you. The best compass is within you and your feeling, how you feel with this tea. Whether this tea is a good tea or a bad tea is for you to judge. And you should know, if you tap into your innate, intuition, or whatever that is. But I think we should not be misled by information, because sometimes it can be very tricky. A tea is only a good tea if that tea speaks to you. And doesn't matter who says how to brew it at what temperature. Just, there's only your tea and there's only your way.
And somebody's out there right now going, blasphemy! But so at least, because you're on the ground with a lot of these tea farmers, the producers, and you've traveled to the countries to work with them. What commonalities have you seen in the areas that you have traveled to?
Oh, there's so many commonalities. And, I actually pull from a lot of the stories, especially in Yunnan, because in Yunnan, like, the people that have discovered the business opportunity around tea, like, yes, it's ancient knowledge and it's inherited trees, like over 1,000 years old. But like the opportunity itself, the current opportunity as we know it, is a very modern one. And that's seen in Lisa's book. Lisa, your book, like, just so incredibly covers all of that history in such a, like, an entertaining way to see. And so that gives hope to these people, these young up and coming tea masters of India or of Nepal or of Sri Lanka or even Malawi, Africa, and letting them know that if they learn to listen to their tea. And it's so funny that you say that, right? Because that's exactly what I tell the farmers that I work with, is like, learn to listen to the tea. Like, until you do that, then let's start tasting your tea. Until then, practice and, like, learn to listen to your tea. And it's funny, after a couple of years, these young guys are like, and you know what, Elise, I was making tea last night and it started talking to me. You were right. It happens. And then the tea was incredible. So there's definitely a lot of commonalities and parallels to pull upon. And I know when you have put this question into the panel, you wanted me to speak on kind of the labor practices and all those things going on. And I really don't want to, like, hammer that in too much. I've already said something on it. But I will tell a story of my experience, developing this business. When I first started, and I got thrown in very quickly into it, just getting exposed to all behind the curtain and feeling like it's my obligation to expose that to the world. And a lot of my peers in the industry tell me, Elise, don't do that. That's very dangerous for you to do, because there are millions of lives involved in these industries. And if you create some type of boycott, then all those lives will be uplifted. And and everybody always focuses the conversation on money. It's all about the wages and the money. And I've come to realize it's not really about the wages and the money. It's about autonomy. It's about independence. It's about identity, cultural identity. And I'll use the story of Darjeeling in particular, because in Darjeeling, there's really bad labor practices. Like, the minimum wage is protected by the government to be about $1.50 a day. It's like nothing. And these people work like crazy. But, God forbid I create a boycott with exposing that information and these people lose their crappy jobs. But I did. I shut my mouth and I didn't say anything because I wanted to respect it. But then 2017, if you remember in the news, there was a strike. What caused these people to strike? To finally say, we're fed up. We're not even going to work. We don't want the money. We'll figure out how to live on our own. It had nothing to do with minimum wage. It had nothing to do with treatment on the tea plantations. What it was the West Bengal government mandating that Bengali become the second language. English the first, of course, and then Bengali would become the second. All of Darjeeling and the people living there, 99% of the population of Darjeeling is Nepali people. They speak Nepali language. And they were forced to abandon their cultural identity. And that's what's caused them to strike. And so I think it's really important lesson to take from that experience. And your book, Lisa, like totally touches on a lot of these things about how important cultural identity is, and how all the money and all that other stuff, that's secondary. Like first we need to focus on the preservation of the culture, and the rest of the stuff, like with autonomy and independence, the rest of the stuff will figure itself out.
You know, that's I think to say that that's sad is an understatement. Um, but there are so many ways, like the further that I delve into this and other, I guess what would be termed social justice, social impact type issues, is that there are so many ways to subjugate people. Um, and to see that done via mere words and a culture or standard practices, not a culture, but standard practices created to reinforce that. Um, that's crafty beyond what should even be able to exist. But if we have the ability to do that, then we also have that same ability to turn that creativity and to craft something so that it benefits the people, because we all lose. Like no one gains when people are subjugated. Um, and we miss out on the richness, we miss out on their own creativity and the things that will come from that. So no one benefits from this at all. But yeah, anyway, for the sake of discussion, because we want to be respectful of everyone's time, it looks like we may very well have to do a part 2 to this, but we'll let the audience determine that if they're interested in it. Why should we? Yes, part 2. All right, Emily. So we have one that's all for it. So bringing it back, because as Ray said, it's about people as it is nature, and we are a part of nature. We dwell in this world together. Oh wow, they're going off the chain. The messages are coming in. It's like, yes, definitely part 2. All right, woo woo. Okay, so guys, we'll discuss afterwards, and we'll try to make that happen for you in a couple of weeks. Okay. But yeah, keep it coming in, because the more of you guys that want it, we had close to 300 people that registered. So thank you so much for your support and interest in this topic. Thank you. But the more of you to say that you want it, the more likely it is to happen. But anyway, back to our discussion. Part of this world we live in definitely is the plant diversity. There are varieties that Ray brought out that only grow within that region. And I'm sure that a lot of people don't know that. In fact, in Lisa's book, and Lisa, I guess if you didn't know why you were here in the beginning, you know now, because you do such an awesome job just interweaving different aspects of the story. And while it's historical fiction, one of the things that I personally admire about your writing is that the history timeline actually happened. So the history is true. It's how you weave a fictional story on top of that is just absolutely amazing. But in your book, referring again to the Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, there's a fictional character, Sean, who has a life-threatening health condition that's alleviated by something in one of the Aka's ancient tea trees. So Linda and Ray and Elise, I'm not sure if you have anything to respond towards this, but Linda and Ray, can you talk to us for a moment about tea's health benefits, please?
Tea has over 500 compounds, and some of those compounds are responsible for the flavors, and some of the compounds are responsible for health benefits. So even though the relationship between the tea is just us and the cup of tea, but then objectively, these compounds they are not distributed equally among all teas, and that it really depends on the growing conditions and the type of cultivation. So and also the genetic. So tea can be cultivated two ways. One is by seeds, and then the other one is by cutting. And the seeds actually is genetically unique, and it can grow into a tree. That's what Ray was talking about, the tea tree. And then if you do the cutting, then the entire plantation is actually monoculture. Okay, so there's no diversity. And I would like to cite a couple of studies by some professors. There's one study that I would like to cite is Professor Albert Robot Jr. from Tufts University. He conducted a 3-year study in Fujian, Yunnan, and South Carolina, and he compared the compounds, the health benefit compounds between tea plants grown in high elevation and low elevation. And his study result indicates that the tea plants grown in high elevation actually produce and contain a lot more and in higher concentration of compounds that are good for us. Whereas, so, if you say, oh, I drink, people say, I drink tea all the time, so, it's good for me. And his answer is, it depends. It depends on where it's grown. So another study that I would like to cite is Dr. Selena Ahmed from Montana University. He spent 4 years studying tea plants cultivated in various ways in Yunnan, China. And her results came out that actually the tea plants that are grown in the most biodiverse manner actually also have more health benefits. And she theorizes that the tea plants that are from from seeds, the ancient tea trees, as well as tea farms that are biodiverse, have to work harder to produce the compounds to fend off the pests, insects, and other environmental stress. Whereas the ones that are planted by cutting, they are pampered by the pesticides and the fertilizers that human help them. So they don't have to work very hard to produce these kind of chemical response. So, and I think those studies are very important to let us know that actually the teas, if we go back to where tea came from, the way that tea was cultivated, they're actually a lot better for us.
May I add something quickly? The way I think about it is, let's say you have a tea tree that is 200, 800, 1,000 years old out there by itself. And it really has had to survive on its own. And whatever you see on top of the ground, that you have that same amount underneath the ground in roots. And so that's spread out, as as Ray mentioned earlier, and then that it's picking up flavors from all of the plants that are around it. But it's also had to survive on its own. And so just, to think about a living creature on Earth that has survived on its own for 800, 1,000 years old, protecting itself. And those compounds that it's developed, turns out, as Linda said, are also and Dr. Ahmed has shown in her work, are also beneficial to us.
Thank you, Lisa. Ray, did you want to add to that?
I've been taking notes. I'm learning as I'm speaking. This is great. Thank you so much. So My understanding is a good tea, any tea, whether it's ancient wild tea or a tea plantation tea, any plants, anything that is living, or any tea that we brew, there are two elements. Where one is where it grows, the land, whether it has pesticides, chemicals, fertilizers, the soil, the elevation, the winds, the everything, the tree itself, whether it comes from the original place or not, how it grows. Second is how it's made. So good tea is 50-50. You can't just, a good tea is the combination of the two. And if you have, let's say, ill intention of making a tea that comes from a 1,500 years old tea tree, you're still not gonna have good tea. So my understanding opinion in this is, let's forget about the health magazine, what it tells you. A green tea is good for you, and let's all drink about green tea. And pu'er tea is slimming, so let's all drink pu'er tea from the very early morning till midnight. Again, it's about yourself. What these health benefits is going to apply to you is very personal. And then you are responsible to learn where the tea comes from. So if you're going to buy a carrot from the supermarket, it's not going to give you that much of vitamin A than if you dig it out from your own garden or from the mountains. It's very, very simple logic. So this is on the health benefits of the tea. We need to first choose the right tea and then think about the health benefits. And now on the health benefits of the wild and ancient indigenous tea trees. In my region, there's a study made that the wild ancient indigenous tea, they have this is a very general study, about 3 times higher in antioxidants, in amino acids, and than the tea plantation made tea. But this is very generalized. But I'd like to, having learned from what Linda said about all the studies, I'd like to invite all of us to look back on the history, why tea was started from the beginning, historically. Tea has been used as a medicine. It's not just a medicine for our physical health. It was used to treat anti-inflammation, to kill bacteria, all of these health properties. But it has physical benefits, all the good things, all the reasons why we drink tea for our own health. But it also has good mental health benefits for ourselves. That's also a medicine. And it also provides a social glue for us to, like today, we gather together 300 people because of tea to have a conversation. That is part of the medicine for me. That is part of the health benefits of the tea for me. And socially, if we all have, let's say we all have tea houses, we all have different things to gather people around, to deepen people's consciousness and awareness and understanding of this tea, that is the health benefits for the whole chain. So it can go a lot bigger than what we just drink from the little cup, I guess. So what tea can, I'm sure all of us would agree, what tea can give us from different parts of the health benefits is vast.
Thank you, Ray. Linda, if our attendees read your profile, I mentioned that you are also a researcher. So could you share with us just briefly about the research that you do, please?
Yeah, actually, I'm not a researcher, but I have connections. I have friends who are biologists at universities. And for example, Tufts University is very active in tea studies. Sometimes I would help them to collect samples for their studies. And then in return, I get the results. I get the studies. And, I'm not a scientist, but then I'm very interested in the science of tea. So I always I attend like the Global Tea Initiative put out by UC Davis. And in fact, Lisa is going to be a speaker next year. So, I think that's just to give me an understanding of, I mean, I don't understand everything, but then it gives me an understanding of some of the importance in tea science.
Thank you. Thank you. It's amazing when we don't know things. Sometimes we wind up destroying our own benefits, like our own solutions. Um, and plant diversity, as you brought out, it is very important for more reasons than what we may even presently understand. So, with that in mind, do you think that the companies that are cutting down trees in Guizhou and other places, are they simply ignorant of the ecology? Are they ignorant of the culture that's being damaged? Or are they blinded by commercialization? And anyone?
One word, capitalism. I also don't think it's a very clear-cut thing. Capitalism is in many different layers and colonialism in many different layers. It's very hard. It probably would need a series to discuss this, but I think it comes from money.
Yeah, I think the cutting down trees, at least in Yunnan, China, and I think, Lisa, you mentioned that in your book too. There was a period in China when they're really striving to improve their economy. Tea farmers were encouraged to chop down the trees so that so it's easy to harvest, and also to increase the branches, so increase productivity. And actually, there was a period probably between 1950 to about 1980. Harvesting from these ancient tea trees were discouraged because it does not give as much yield as the tea plantations. So it wasn't until like in the 90s when people in Taiwan and in Hong Kong, and they started to think, hey, teas that were made in the 40s and the 30s, they were so good then, but teas were not made that way anymore. So then it pretty much reverted back, and they started to harvest from these ancient tea trees. So yes, capitalism, ignorance, all play a role in chopping down those trees. Now you don't see that because of the economic value. So they protect these trees and, no longer chopping them down.
Well, that's definitely good. Ray, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to share a little bit of the stories on my encounter with ancient trees being cut off. Be ready, this is going to be quite sad, and that's the reality you all need to hear. So, I think compared to the neighbor province Yunnan, Guizhou is probably about, let's say, 10 to 20 years behind in terms of economy or capitalism, however we want to define it or put it into the bracket. So right now, every time when I go back home, I've seen vast lands of wild ancient indigenous tea trees being cut off, and endless of tea plantations, GM'd version of tea trees planted, beyond your eyesight you could see. And even the indigenous cultures, the Miao people, for example, one of the sub Miao, they go now. They live in concrete houses rather than bamboo or wooden houses. So it's growing into rapid speed, and because simply because the ancient tea trees do not grow into the speed that the I don't know, capitalist world or the needs that we demand for modern days, particularly the demand for GM green tea, TCT green tea. So this is the harsh reality of it. And in Guizhou, there's also in the 50s to 80s, like Linda shared, in the northeast of Guizhou, the indigenous tea tree called Tai, T-A-I. The government, the central government, sent a team of 40-something people from Hangzhou to come as an expert to look at the production of ancient tea trees. And they decided to cut all of them because the production was too low. And it took them 48 days with 40 of them to cut all of the ancient wild tea trees. 48 days, day and night. And the local tribe who was Gelao people, their wisdom had led them to hide some of the areas which is part of the reason why we can still enjoy some of the wild ancient Thai tea, the production, the produce from that tree, those trees. But it had been very much damaged, and they are dying. And we don't just look at the ancient tea trees. There's the ancient wisdom of making them. The generations are learning them. And now it's almost embarrassing for the young generations to learn traditional craft in terms of tea making. So these are the things that I want to share this because for me, a local growing up, I don't have a word to describe when you see these things, when you're there seeing them just lay in front of you like corpse, and they live through centuries, and we gotta do something about this.
That's why, and that's what drove us all together. That's what prompted this discussion. It's ridiculously sad. Yeah, but I like how you refer to them. It's just a course because they are rotting. They are actually killing not only the tree but the culture and the history that goes with that. One question I have briefly, because we are approaching time, and I still want to get to honor our attendees with a brief Q&A. But one thing that I couldn't find an answer to. So they're cutting down the trees. Is there a specific reason why they're replacing them with GMO trees? Like, why not just leave the land bare? Do you know?
Politics, because so if you think about a region have been poor for thousands of years, and because of the political or economical strategy has always been to let the East Coast develop first. So now the eastern wind has turned westerly. So the central government has been laying on the emphasis on helping the southwest region, their economy to grow based on GDP. And part of that is because they do that by building roads. In the last 5 years, we built more than 300 bridges just to get to places. But when I was growing up, to travel 20 kilometers is 6 hours. It goes up and down, up and down. Now just a tunnel, you go through it. Yeah, it's very quick. So with roads built, things can travel, trade can be made, and to sort of help the economy, to help people who are struggling under the UN poverty standards out of poverty. The answer is to grow tea. I'm not saying at all like all of them are growing GMT trees. I'm just giving you an example of what I experienced that is really sad, and I share that because we need to hear it. It's not all of that, but it has been one of the focus because of the land, the soil. It's just natural. Its natural condition is there to provide for us. So it becomes one of the political economic strategy for us to grow rice and to grow tea. We used to grow tobacco for the British American Tobacco Corporation. Now we don't do that, we do tea. There's good things and the bad things with every decision made. So it's just a reality that somehow the ancient tea trees have been on the bad side of it. We need to keep a balance, I think.
Thank you, Ray. Thank
May
you.
I add something very quickly?
Sure. Go ahead, Lisa.
In Yunnan, when I was traveling with Linda, a lot of the, not just tea trees, but even the tea terraces, terrace tea had been torn out to plant rubber plants and also coffee. And so, coffee is one of the really big replacement crops these days. And that's because coffee is becoming very popular in China. Starbucks is huge there. And so you can't really begrudge people to want to improve their lives and to make money. And we obviously, all of us here, have a real kind of almost like a spiritual attachment to the history and culture of these ancient tea trees. But I think if the people who are listening and watching, it's pretty easy to get a sense that this is a very small amount of all the tea that's grown globally. It's a tiny amount, and it's labor intensive, and it's sold to just a very small percentage of the world's population, whereas everybody drinks coffee and those, and rubber and things like that. So I as much as I hate seeing any ancient tea trees cut down, I can't endorse that in any way. But the other side of it is, how do you improve people's lives? And Elise down there in the corner, every once in a while, she does this, symbol for money, and that really is right at the bottom or at the top of this issue. Is how do you strike a balance, right, between keeping your culture, keeping the tradition, keeping the ancient tea trees, and improving people's lives, and just all of the issues of capitalism just in general that Ray was talking about.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think that that's quickly, Ray.
Very quick, very quick. I just wanted to continue a little bit on this. Is there isn't a simple answer to this, because it's very easy for us to sit here and to say, oh, cutting them down is bad. It's very, very easy for us to have a judgment on this. But I grew up in Guizhou without running water, without electricity. I know what it means to be poor. So you can't go and tell these people you can't cut them. But I think it's the consciousness and also the educational level to help people to see, to help people who are poor to see beyond that, to see what they can do for their grandchildren, and to help them to see further. And I think in terms of the damage of colonialism and capitalism is really the poverty in your brain, because you can't see it. So I think it's for us to help is really the awareness to help these people rather than just to tell them, which is the easiest route. And I do not recommend. It's not so clear cut.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you. And on that, so our last question for the panel before we head into the Q&A. Lisa, you are the first to touch on it. So where do we go from here? What are some actionable steps, or just what is your take on the future of tea? And Lisa, since you were the first one to touch on that, why don't you take it first, please?
I actually don't know the answers, and I don't really even have suggestions. I would just sort of echo what Ray just said, that I think farmers who have had tea, and have been growing tea for generations and have been working with these ancient tea trees for generations, I think that they can be encouraged to keep them, but they also need to be able to reach that outside market. And I think that this is where people like Linda and Elise come in, who can find farmers and processors and producers who are doing this the right way. And those farmers are being rewarded. I mean, in Yunnan, certainly life has changed, and I'm sure in other regions in China as well, for the people who have embraced this artisanal way of processing tea and of looking at the ancient tea trees. So I do think a lot of it has to do with education, not just for the people on the ground who are working, who have tea trees, but also for the consumer, and to maybe partially elevate the general tea drinker. That's a process. It certainly has been a process for me. I have always been a tea drinker, but during the research and writing of The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, I have to be, really honest and say I turned into a tea snob. Well, if more of us turned into tea snobs, then there's going to be more and more of a demand for this really incredible, high quality artisanal tea. And then that creates value. And we know that even here in this country, that artisanal goods have gone up in value. We search them out, we use them, we buy them, and that has improved the lives of many farmers who, let's say they're organic farmers, or they're trying to create whatever their product is in an artisanal way. So just the same way that we are changing here, I think people can change in China as well. And then that has an impact on the international market.
Thank you. Elise?
Yeah, Lisa, I wanted to jump in because I wanted to tag on what you just said. So I recently, maybe about a year ago, started saying, being a connoisseur doesn't make me a snob. It makes me an environmentalist. So, if you think about it from that perspective, it really can be useful that, like, by being a connoisseur, and connoisseur has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with wealth. Like public perception, sometimes people think like, oh, you collect wine or you collect tea or you collect scotches, you must be wealthy. No, I just care about it. And I care about the quality of it. So very important to embrace value and embrace connoisseurship and playing a part in sustainability. As far as what we can do as an industry to improve the condition and build a strong future, educating ourselves first is first and foremost. There's a really incredible report that was put out by Forum for the Future called Tea 2030 that gives out 5 different scenarios of where they envision the tea market's going to go. It is sad to read, but I do recommend that you all read it. I'm going to put it in the chat comments right here so you can get the link to download it. It's really sad because 4 out of 5 of those scenarios has tea being like completely mechanized, completely GMO, completely like one of them is like exclusively 100% of tea produced by 2030 is going exclusively into the supplement industry. We're not even going to drink it like this. And the one scenario that does involve actual like organic planting of tea is like super artisanal. So, I think in the future, things are going to become very polarized. It's either going to be very, very mechanized, very commodity in a pill, just take it in a pill and you're done. Or it's going to be connoisseurship level. And so I think like as tea lovers, our responsible role is to become a connoisseur and support that and create that opportunity on a larger scale. Because the bigger the scale that opportunity is, the more of these artisanal, like sustainably minded farmers can benefit from that opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Linda?
Yeah, I think the consumer needs to be educated that good teas are not mass produced. They require a lot of work. They are not being picked every day. There are seasons, and it requires a lot of expertise and experience to make. So these teas command a higher value, and the consumers need to be willing to pay for those extra dollars to pay for these products. And I think the consumer, by paying the extra dollars, not only be rewarded by having a product that is good for us and is more flavorful, but it also provides a financial incentive for the farmers to employ these sustainable farming practices. And pu'er tea is a really prime example because people are willing to pay, or of course, not all pu'er tea is produced in a sustainable manner, but then the ones that can fetch a high price, those people are willing to pay very high because of the small amount available, like Lisa said. And I think if consumers have high expectations and they're willing to pay, and that would be incentive for the farmers to farm in the manner that is good for the earth, for the environment.
Thank you. Just a brief thought before hearing from Ray. You know, it's interesting. Technology has, especially technology, the internet in particular, has spoiled people, has trained them to want everything for free. But free is not sustainable. There, and even with free, there's a definite cost affixed to it somewhere. All the lights in the world are not going to put a roof over someone's head without that converting into actual monetary value somewhere down the line. So if we can spend $7 for Starbucks, which just what I discovered, that's taking some of these ancient trees and blending them in, the tea from the trees, and blending them in with theirs or their coffees to make their blend. But you don't know that though. But you pay the $7 or more for whatever it is you're purchasing. And the tea farmer who grew that is settling and selling kilos at pennies on the dollar. So it's a matter of, as I said in my opening statement, what is it that we actually value? Do we continue to value all things free and subjugate people or keep their quality of life basically at a certain level so that we can consume and that we can benefit? Or do we realize that by supporting other people and by really living the worker's worth is higher, that even though we're paying more, we're getting what we're paid for and it's better for us overall? I'm gonna get off my soapbox. Ray, your comments, please, and then we'll go directly into Q&A.
Right. I love talking about actions. So I think, to me, the clarity, we need to understand the clarity here is tea as a commodity or tea as a way of life, they're different. And the clarity we're talking about here is tea as a commodity and what we can do about it. And so tea as a way of life has been living under I call it the white shadow, i.e. capitalism, that kills the diversity, kills the vibrant colors of diversity, of cultures, of authenticity. And this is why we know less and less of the stories of nature, and we just drink tea bags or whatever that is. So if we're looking at the way tea has been from the very beginning to the tea we know now, I see them as a parallel at the moment. One is a massive road, the other one is a little path. So by us having a conversation here, we can actually bring a crossing between these two by, I don't know, technically bringing balance, or tea plantation, wild tea trees, they can be a balance. I do not believe in equality in capitalist world, but I believe in keeping a balance between things. And this is what I'm looking for always. So I think there are four things that we can do. First, to start educate yourself when you can be bothered. I understand there are times that you just want to throw a tea bag in and drink it, and just because you're so tired. I understand that. But if you want to be a conscious human being sometimes or always, Start educating yourself by unlearning the things you've already learned, i.e. brainwashed by capitalist brainwashing information. Really delve deep to understand the knowledge directly from where it comes from, and to really diversify your knowledge, diversify your compass, not just this one because Health Magazine tells you so, but go a bit deeper. Go deeper than the information that you appear to find. Second is learn to find the source, learn to learn directly from the source. So either being the tea master or being the tea brands that hold true to their origin, or by the middlemen who know what they're doing and has a more or less a ethical compass, or whose aim are about diversifying or solidifying the cultures of tea. So really go, and I think this is the thing that the thing we learn can be so superficial, and that can be very misleading. So for example, like today we're launching the tea house, and on the tea house you have a lot of programs you can learn directly from the source. So this becomes very transparent and very direct learning. And the third is, I'm in the tea business, but I'm going to ask you to drink less tea. Drink less tea, drink less tea, drink less tea, but drink better tea. When you drink better tea, a tea like this, it goes on for 3 days, 4 days, one brew. But it goes on and on and on. And this is, we can choose to consume less. And buy, if you can, buy directly from the source, if you can, or closest you can get to the source. And if we're talking about the ancient tea trees, if we're talking about traditional making, the problem has been that people are now trapped in picking from tea plantations. So they cannot go and sustain their legacy, because they're trapped in the mental knowledge-based poverty. They cannot learn. They're not designed to learn. So when you do that, when you drink less tea but drink better tea, it helps sustain the tradition, help diversify the culture, help bring closer your relationship with these tea trees, with these tea farmers, tea makers. And it actually gives data like us, for example, us, Grass People Tree, we take data where I share tea worldwide, go back, show the politicians, show the people who make policies to say, look, yellow tea traditionally made in southwest of Guizhou is now dying out. But look, here's 4,600 people who bought this tea this year. And doesn't matter what the domestic market tells you, here's the international market figure. And we can use this data to go and convince them to change their policy. And each one of us, our action counts to this. Our interaction with this tea, or the stories of the tea, counts to this.
Which is why we're here.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. Last thing I think is to, I think it's a, sometimes I see this as a culture war, culture fight. Is to really stand firm with the stories that we hold, that has been going on for thousands of years. But by sharing a tea, or sharing a conversation, or even just to brew a tea for yourself by others, sharing the joy of nature, of the stories, of whatever it brings you, share this joy, and share it as much as you can with yourself, with others, with everyone around you, and with the environment. And that will make an impact in the long run. So these are the 4 things, and I cross my fingers.
We're right with you. Okay, so due to the time, we're only going to take 3 questions from the audience. I promise that if you asked a question that was meant to be directed to a specific panelist, I will forward those to them, and hopefully they can get a response back by Friday, but I will pass any questions that are not asked today. I will definitely pass them on. So diving right into it, I think this is something that we touched on. Christy says, as consumers, what should we be on the lookout for? Or what are the red flags that a brand is exploiting producers? Good question, Christy. Whoever wants to take that, please.
I think when you buy tea, in fact, I get this question a lot. It's like, how do I know? Where do I get to buy the good tea? Just be curious. I mean, there's no difference than you go to, buy your tomatoes. Be curious, listen to the story, ask questions, and then to see how much the seller actually knows about the product. And if the seller doesn't even know, you go away, get out. And the more that the seller can tell you about the details of that product, that's a good sign. So I think that's the first thing you look for. And then once you develop the relationship with the seller, then that becomes your trusted vendor. One thing about buying tea is, you don't want to buy a pound or anything like that. Buy an ounce, buy some samples, and then you develop your trust that way. Try different vendors. And that's how you find that your trusted vendor is kind of like your gatekeeper, because you will not be able to learn as much as your vendor. But the gatekeeper, the vendor, the trusted vendor can be your gatekeeper to make sure that the product that you're buying will be trusted.
Thank you. Another question. So this is somewhat related, but is kind of different. Denise from San Diego wanted to know, what can a tea drinker do now to help protect the future of tea harvesting?
Develop their connoisseurship. I mean, I think that this is something that we keep saying over and over again. And I know it seems like it's not action now. Like I have to convince all of my friends in the whole world to do it. But those are seeds, and seeds are powerful. And that's what we're trying to protect here, right? It's a seed. So we just put more seeds out, create more, get them more out. I just wanted to also add that I added a link in the comments to a list and actually the list of questions that are in that article I posted are the exact questions that I ask every farmer that we work with. So I think there's like 30 or so questions on that. How many are there? Oh no, yeah, there's 30 questions, and some of them are pretty deep questions about minimum wage, about the soil conditions. And like what I encourage consumers to do is like feel confident to ask those questions to a vendor. If the vendor doesn't have the answers to them, like don't shame them. But the more you ask that question, the more you're going to encourage that vendor to seek out the answers and seek out the sources of tea that will empower them to be able to answer those questions.
Thank you, Elise. And Lisa, of course, this is just one of the questions that is specifically for you. Oh my, I just had it. Okay, this is from Terry T. She says, what are the yellow threads in Haley's tea cake? Are they a fungus that cured Sean's cancer? And she also wants to know, is there a sequel plan to The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane?
Well, I can start backwards and say that I don't have a sequel planned. It ends where it ends. But with the yellow threads, that was actually inspired by 4 different things. And the first was when I went twice to the International Tea Expo, both times with Linda. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to any kind of expo, but a tea expo is just like they're selling cars or gifts or whatever. You have all these booths and different people selling different types of tea, and or where you can taste them and have them for your shop or whatever. But they also have seminars, and some of them are how to taste herbal teas or how to start your own tea shop. And in this case, this was one that was sponsored by a very large tea company in China. And, in this seminar, they were pouring teas and we got to taste them. And the last one was something that they called yellow hair tea. And the way they explained it is that what had happened was in one of their warehouses where they were aging the tea, something got in there, and these yellow threads started to grow through. And so we know that tea is generally good for you, green tea is better for you, pu'er is even better for you. But this tea, according to this company, had even heightened health benefits, so much so that China's version of the FDA had approved it as a cancer drug. Now, of course, China's version of the FDA is not the FDA. They have approved things like toothpaste with lead in it and stuff like that. So at that time, when I was at the conference, that tea was being tested in studies at Stanford, UC Berkeley, and UC Davis. Now, obviously, if it had been proven to be a cancer cure, we would all know about it, right? So it wasn't. But I took that idea and then combined it with three other things. First, this idea that so many of the ethnic minorities in Yunnan did come down from Tibet, maybe 1,000 years ago. And we know that as people travel, and we know this right now today because we're experiencing it, they bring with them parasites and viruses and seeds and stuff that they're picking up along the way. And that's what gets transported here. And you said you're from San Diego. You know how we have now in California the polyphagous shot hole borer, which is attacking our trees. It came originally from Vietnam. And so, that just carried over to here somehow. We don't know the answer to that. So anyway, I took that idea that people could have been picking stuff up and bringing it with them on their way. And then the last, I guess it's only three things. The last was this idea that we hear a lot about the Amazon rainforest and how we shouldn't be tearing it down because, as scientists will often say, there could be a cure for cancer in there. And by tearing it down, we don't know. So I took all of those ideas to create the yellow threads that are in the tea in the book that have such amazing healing qualities. But do they in real life? Not so far. But that's where a writer's imagination comes in.
And that's exactly one of the reasons why, if you have not read The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, that's one of the reasons why you would love her books. Just one last question, simply because, and this will be the last question, simply because I think it's so uncommon, at least to me. But and with the question, I will say I ran across a profile actually this week that was doing the same thing or something similar. Zehong Cha was the profile. I think it means only black tea. But what this person was doing was a combination of mixing sake and tea blend. But the question that's asked is that this person has heard of tea infused spirits and woods. Do you foresee this becoming more common, or will it remain craft? I think they're talking about infusing, like combining tea and alcohol or tea and spirits. So anyway.
I can answer that very quickly. You're seeing that a lot in different, with bartenders who are doing these kind of craft cocktails. And maybe that will grow and maybe it won't. But having tasted a lot of them, yum, I'm all for it.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so I think Ray gave her closing remarks, but just in case, if each of the panelists, if you would take turns, and Ray, we're going to start with you, but please just stay 1 minute closed because our attendees have been very, very gracious to us so far.
Thank you all. I think this sort of conversation is much needed, but also to me gives me hope because once we have curiosity, I think that's the key to the door that could open for us to be doing a lot of great things, particularly people who work in the industry or consume teas. So here I just wanted to, just to say my love and gratitude. Thank you so much for joining together and for this very inspiring discussion. And I think the key for us is to keep communicating, and through doing that, we drink good tea, we have good understanding of each other, we have good conversation, and we have a way of working things out together. We're never alone in this. So yeah, thank you all, and pass the mic.
Linda?
Okay. I guess my husband also calls me a tea snob, and I always told him I'm proud of it, and so be it. And I always, when I do my classes, I always tell people, and I second what Ray said, if you're going to drink tea, you might as well drink good tea. When people ask me, what kind of tea is my favorite tea? And I said, in my tea vocabulary, there are only two kinds of tea, good teas and bad teas. And it is worth it because it's not just worth it for me, it's worth for, and I think the farmers, whenever you go to the tea plantation, you will understand the amount of work that goes into making tea. And I appreciate that, and I would pay premium dollar for it. And I think when you drink that tea, think about the work goes behind producing the tea. And so that's drink good tea.
Elise?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Drink more tea, drink good tea. And you know what? If you end up drinking bad tea on your way of learning what good tea is, no shame in that. Like that's the education we all have to go through. So yeah, drink the tea, share the tea. Even if you think it's not cool, it's actually very cool. Tea is very cool in America right now. It's very cool all over the world right now. So embrace it, and yeah, stay a part of that conversation, stay learning. Tea is very important. I didn't know how important it was when I started my journey into it. I'm more focused on food. I'm very much into food. But I've come to learn that tea is it's like the core. It's like the seed of agriculture and processing and food. So yeah, drink more good tea. Thank you.
And Lisa?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming and to listening to us. And yes, just drink more tea, drink better tea, and think about the people who are touching your tea leaves, that you're drinking life. And it's not just the life of the tree or the plant, but it's also the life of the people who produce it.
Thank you. So this ends our conversation. If you would like to obtain a recording of this afternoon's discussion, just visit the same registration link, notjusttea.eventbrite.com. And then when you click on register, an option will show for you to obtain the recording. We did mention, along with our series, that there were going to be several drawings. The winners will be announced, and that announcement will go out in tomorrow's email from In Her Company. So please keep your eyes open for that. But I am Chris Vaughn. Thank you on behalf of our panelists and In Her Company. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much for putting this together for all of us.
My pleasure.
You're the
My
mother.
pleasure.
Thank you for being a mother.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.